Well, for those of you that work or live in Kansas City, Missouri, you know that you get hit with that 1% earnings tax, and you have been for many, many years now. And it just got renewed, last year? So it's not going anywhere. But something could be happening in Jeff City that could impact St. Louis's earnings tax, and let's see how that could apply to Kansas City down the road. David Stokes is with the Show Me Institute, and he joins us on KCMO. David, good morning. What's happening on this front, man?
Good morning, Pete. Great to talk to you, sir. So there's a new committee that's been formed, and it's a legislative interim committee, a special committee on the earnings tax, and they're going to start holding some hearings here over the next few months, and that may well continue into the legislative session as well that starts in January. And it's focused on the earnings tax and on the earnings tax in St. Louis and Kansas City. And there's going to be a series of hearings on it. I'm sure Kansas City government will send somebody to speak at some or all of them. And it's going to debate sort of multiple parts of it. One, I think it hopes to look at the overall harms of the earnings tax. And it's indisputable that the earnings tax harms economic growth in Kansas City and St. Louis. The Show Me Institute has done numerous studies on this at showmeinstitute.org. But also, it's going to look at the remote work aspect of the earnings tax. And in this one, we can give Kansas City government a lot of credit because they have not decided to change the rules and arbitrarily apply the earnings tax to remote work, which is against the law. Any plain reading of the law would show that you can't do that. But in St. Louis, they've changed the rules and just sort of done this without any real legal authority. They've lost in court, but they're still doing it until I guess it goes to the Supreme Court or something. So that's going to be another aspect of the earnings tax. So and these committees, the remote work abuse in St. Louis, that we, again, to the credit of Kansas City government, haven't quite seen there.
So Kansas City basically said if you work from home, let's say 3 days a week, you could get 60% of your earnings tax back 3 out of 5 days, right?
Right, and that's how any plain reading of the law, the existing law, says. I mean, cities, St. Louis and Kansas City have no right to this money. If you recall, about a year and a half ago, Kansas City tried to tighten up the process for claiming your refunds, and I don't begrudge them an effort to formalize the process slightly as the number of refunds increased dramatically after work from home and the pandemic and all. But Kansas City went too far with their changing of the process. If you recall, Pete, we discussed it several times. Even the accountants and the CPAs out there were thoroughly confused by Kansas City's new rules. So again, Kansas City gets credit for scrapping their changes and going back to the old system, which is pretty user-friendly and easy for people to claim refunds for when they're not working in Kansas City. St. Louis, on the other hand, has just completely done absolutely the wrong thing in insisting that you still owe that money. Now, courts have ruled against the city, but the hope of the city is that they won't get class action status and that not a lot of people are going to file lawsuits over what, for most people, is several $100s a year at most. And frankly, a lot of people aren't going to file a lawsuit over that. But those are the things that this hearing, chaired by State Representative Jim Murphy out of St. Louis. I know there's some Kansas City representatives on the committee, of course. It should be interesting, and they're going to have hearings around the state, and I'm certain they're going to have one in Kansas City, I'm sure.
But what's like the end game here? I'm glad there's a state committee looking into this, but, I mean, the state committee is going to come out of this and find that taxes are burdensome. I mean, thanks so much, guys. I think we all realize that, but there are people who obviously in Kansas City and St. Louis don't think that, and they're of the belief that, well, if you want to fund your police and you want to fund your fire, you must pass an earnings tax. So, like, what's the end game?
Well, the end game could be twofold here. One is it could just legislation to tighten up the language in the state earnings tax to make even more clear that taxing remote work, as St. Louis is doing, is illegal. So to stop what St. Louis is doing and prevent Kansas City from ever doing that. Not that Kansas City's government is planning to do it, but that would be the easiest end game and probably hopefully one that they can truly accomplish. The other end game is to just continue the state discussion and to demonstrate to people that, look, most cities don't have earnings taxes. For all the talk about how the 1% earnings tax is low compared to other cities with earnings taxes and how the important stuff that it funds, and I don't dispute that it funds important, necessary things. Again, most cities don't have an earnings tax. Only about 20 to 25 large cities in America have earnings taxes. The vast majority of them don't, and the vast majority of them are able to fund local government just as well as St. Louis and Kansas City do. Maybe their property taxes are slightly higher. Maybe their sales taxes are slightly higher. Maybe they use more fees or have more outsourcing and privatization. There's all sorts of options, but continuing this discussion over ways to phase out the earnings tax over, say, a 10-year period to create a better economic environment in Kansas City, that would be a wonderful discussion to be had.
David Stokes with the Show Me Institute is joining us on KCMO Talk Radio. It would be. I would love to have that conversation. What about, the old taxation without representation angle on this, where people who do not live in Kansas City, of course, end up paying for it, but they have no vote on the earnings tax? I know that's not unique to Kansas City, but is that something that could be challenged legally, that should be looked into by the state? I mean, is there anything there?
That's brought up a lot, and I think philosophically it's a very good point, and it's a legitimate point. Legally, I don't think it's something that's going to hold up. I mean, state law does authorize the earnings tax, so there is a law authorizing it. So, and it has been challenged in court a long, long time ago, and it's always been upheld. So I don't think that's going to win in court there. But it's sort of, sales taxes have a similar issue. And what I mean by that is everybody wants to tax other people. Kansas City residents want to tax people who don't live in Kansas City. The people in whatever suburb with a big shopping mall, they want high sales taxes so they can tax the shoppers who come into their city. Former United States Senator Russell Long, who chaired the Senate Finance Committee for a long time, pun intended, he used to have a little ditty he would sing, and it was, "Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree." And that's sort of how people want tax policy to be. Let's go tax that other person. And that's an argument. Nobody wants to hear this, and especially in times of high reassessment. But that's one of the benefits of property taxes, is that when Missourians, Kansas Cityans have to vote on a property tax increase, they know that they're going to be the ones to pay it. So you think long and hard. Are these new services or this expansion of existing services, are they worth the additional money I'm going to have to pay as a property owner? And that sort of helps hold government down, as opposed to the idea that earnings taxes, well, half of it's paid by non-residents, so let's get money from them, or sales taxes, half of that's paid by shoppers who visit our mall, so let's get them. That sort of allows government to grow because it's easier to say yes to those tax increases.
Last thing, David Stokes, could the state, I don't think it would do it, but could the state ever just pass a bill saying Kansas City and St. Louis cannot have an earnings tax?
Yes, I believe it could. It's actually in the Constitution that no other, I shouldn't say it's in the Constitution. We passed a state law about 10 years ago. I don't recall if it was a constitutional amendment or just a referendum for a statute. So no other cities in Missouri can have an earnings tax. You'd have to amend state law to do that. But just the same way it goes, yes, I believe the state has full authority to withdraw the law authorizing St. Louis and Kansas City from doing it. There's a law giving them permission to do it, so pretty obviously there could be a law saying they can't do it. Nobody wants that to be done quickly.
Yeah.
Even I'm adamantly opposed to the earnings tax. Nobody wants to put either major city, which are these are the drivers of the economy in Missouri, Kansas City and St. Louis. Nobody wants to put them in some sort of crushing bind here and not be able to fund local government. But over the long term, like a 10-year phase out, you can start doing things to help make this possible. And the number one thing for Kansas City to start doing is stop giving out all the tax subsidies, particularly property tax abatements and TIFs and the like, that make the city even more dependent on earnings taxes than it otherwise would be.
Yeah.
When you're in a hole, stop digging, and that's what I'd love to see Kansas City do right away.
All right, David. Great stuff, man. Thank you for being here as always. Appreciate the time.
Always great talking to you, Pete. Tons of stuff on the earnings tax at showmeinstitute.org, including Professor Howard Wall's newest study on it. I hope people check it out.
You bet. We will. David Stokes on KCMO.